Okay, let's talk about some gimmick bands. So what I mean by that is bands that define themselves based on a specific aesthetic or a specific vibe to their sound, to their lyricism, to their imagery, generally speaking, that sets them apart from all of the other bands in their respective niches. There are a lot of bands that could fit this bill, but I tried to condense it to a list of the bands that I think represent this category the most and the ones that I have enjoyed the most. But in the comment section below, you guys can let me know, in your opinion, the best gimmick metal bands. It can be for any given reason. I took a very liberal approach in some of the ones that I included here, and I can't wait to hear your guys' list. But without further ado, let's get into the video. And if you end up enjoying it, drop a like. Starting off, I want to say Ice Nine Kills. I think sometimes their music is a little bit of a swing and a miss. I think that when it comes to their lyricism, you could say they're cringy and corny, but I think that plays into the ethos of their entire sound, because if what they are borrowing from are horror movies and horror properties, a lot of them are fucking corny and cringy as shit. That's kind of the entire point of a lot of B-list horror movies, and so when they're ripping from it and they're leaning into the camp, I think that fits perfectly, and it doesn't hurt that Ice Nine Kills is just a great metalcore band with great songwriting, great riffs, great vocalizations, great production. So even if not all of Ice Nine Kills' discography is perfect in my opinion, and I think some of their ideas kind of fall flat when they borrow from certain things that they don't necessarily execute the best, I overall think that they are a great representation of what they are trying to do and a wonderful approximation of all of their influences. I also think it's an incredibly important thing when a band is just not taking themselves too seriously. You need bands that are willing to have fun, and I think it's obvious that Ice Nine Kills, with the way that they write their music, with the way they perform on stage, they are clearly just obviously having fun with it, and that makes it cool. This is an obvious one, so I'm getting it out of the way. You gotta say Slipknot. Slipknot has always been more than their masks, and they've never necessarily made that their entire identity, but aesthetically, obviously Slipknot is probably the quintessential band when it comes to the masked aesthetic. They walked so Sleep Token could run, and it's apparent that their discography has gone through a lot of shifts. They've done a lot of different styles throughout their era. Most of the time they fall into the alternative metal and sort of new metal vibe, and I am a big fan of classic Slipknot. I think that their first 3 records are about as close to flawless as you can get when it comes to the style that they performed in, but there is so much more to them outside of the masks, and I know that they kind of got a lot of shit back in the day, and sometimes still get shit for being cringy because of the masks and people not liking anonymous bands, which they're not even doing it for the sake of anonymity anyway. People know the members of Slipknot. That wasn't ever anything that was left up to question, except maybe at the start of their career, but people know who Slipknot are, they know the members, they know their backstories. It's just a fun little thing. And anyone that just defines them solely by the masks, I think, are missing out on a great band with a lot of classic material. Next up, I want to say Portal. Portal, I think, has a couple of things going for them when it comes to the unique gimmick department. Number one, if you've ever seen their stage performances, they're absolutely absurd. The way that they use theatrics sort of to make them more intimidating and more daunting, and also just their costumes, I think they fall under that category a lot, but also Portal's sound. There's really no one with that weird, wispy vocalization that was heard on an album like Ion, this labyrinth sort of style. I personally love Portal, and when it comes to technical death metal, they're incredibly unique just from a sonic department, let alone the aesthetics of their imagery or how they perform on stage. I think it all just comes together to make a very unique band that scratches a certain itch that very few other bands do, and if there was another band that scratched the itch, I would probably recommend Ulcerate if you haven't heard of them. Another kind of obvious one alongside Slipknot that I love, Ghost. Ghost is so funny because they tamper with a lot of the expectations that people would have of a band like them, thinking that they would be some satanic band, a devil-worshipping band that is just here to bring forth these black evil incantations, but that's not necessarily Ghost. A lot of their aesthetic is intended to be campy and to poke fun at a lot of the things that people accuse them of. So the fact that people do get outraged at their music videos and out their songs and stuff, and you have all these people throwing a hissy fit and pearl clutching, it really does prove that the exact experiment that they were sort of doing with their sound was true, because Ghost is far from a satanic band. They play around with the imagery, but that's no different than a lot of the occult rock bands of the past and early heavy metal and shock rock bands. They're just doing it in a modern sphere, and considering they're reigniting and reinvigorating the sounds of the past, it's kind of cool to see the modern era never change in terms of people talking about how they are satanic and they're dangerous and they're evil. It's just funny all around. But the cherry on top of it is just that Ghost is a really good band. band with really good material. Want to shout out Mushroomhead? I don't know if this is one that would pop into people's heads immediately, but once again, you have a band that is very known for masks and theatrics on stage, but more so, their avant-garde style going hand in hand with that sort of completes the trend, sort of continues the trend of bands that not only have a very distinct visualization to their style, but also a very distinct sound that no one else really does. They're all over the place. The amount of influences they have and how weird their songwriting is just makes everything more freakish and more weird and more unique and more specific to them. And also just another band with a whole lot of influence that a lot of people don't give them the credit they deserve for. Sabaton's fun. I feel like you could put a lot of power metal bands here because that's kind of their whole thing, is high fantasy and going really above and beyond and over the top. That's their entire vibe. But when it comes to Sabaton, I think Sabaton's always, number one, been a band that is very good to get newcomers into metal and newcomers into rock, because they're very widely applicable and they sound really cool, but they're still heavy and they still sort of embody the essence of heavy metal as a whole. But it's their fascination with war stuff and history that makes them unique and makes Sabaton Sabaton, because if you ask the average person that even has a cursory experience with Sabaton and with heavy metal as a whole, what does Sabaton write about? What does Sabaton look like? What is their vibe? Most of the time people will know immediately what the vibe Sabaton goes for is. So I think they definitely deserve to be on a list like this. Moving on from there, Gwar. What's to say about Gwar? They are like the fucking court jester of the heavy metal world, and they always have been. This is another example, kind of like Ice Nine Kills, but maybe more so, where the sound is good, the music is good. It's not comedy in terms of the sound itself, but it's very comedic and silly and full of the fucking whimsy when it comes to the way they write their lyrics and what they make their song topics about. The fact that they shoot fucking cum cannons into the audience, if I remember correctly. It's fun, and with how many grim and dark bands are so serious and so just laying in this dark place, it's awesome to have bands like Gwar that are instantly recognizable for people both within and outside of the metal and rock world, but also make quality music, because I think that it will automatically boost your credibility up in the metal and rock world if you are capable of making music that is enjoyable as a standalone and as an album experience, while still having an incredibly unique identity that everyone knows you for. Pulling both of those off is very difficult, because a lot of bands have one but not the other. A lot of bands make really good material but don't really have their own identity, and a lot of bands have a cool identity but don't really have the music to back it up, and that's what makes bands like Ice Nine Kills and Slipknot and Ghost and Gwar last as long as they have and sort of achieve the sort of popularity and acclaim that they have, is because they have both. They bridge the gap between being popular and making good music, but also having a distinct identity that makes people come back and be able to look at you and say, that is absolutely Gwar, that is absolutely Slipknot, immediately knowing who you are talking about, what their vibe is, what do they look like, what do they sound like. If people immediately know what you are, that is something that you have done right. Next up, Amon Amarth. Now, there are a lot of Viking metal bands, much like a lot of idiosyncratic micro-genres, that embody the Viking spirit, but none quite like Amon Amarth in terms of the pagan campiness of a lot of their music, their imagery, their aesthetic, their live performances, their stage presence, the way that they design their stage, the way that they make concept albums like Jomsviking, and just every single one of their songs being sort of this high concept paying homage to Nordic times. They look the part, they fucking sound the part, they own the part. That is absolutely their territory, and kind of like I said with Gwar, people automatically know Amon Amarth is the Viking band, but they have great melodic death metal music a la At the Gates or Dark Tranquillity or In Flames, but they do so with a distinctive identity that people immediately can identify. And man, I just love Amon Amarth. I think it's a little on the nose sometimes, and I don't think Amon Amarth has ever necessarily been known for the strongest lyricism in terms of poeticism, but I think there's something to be said about the quality of the material combined with how sometimes cheesy the lyrics can be, but why it immediately brings you into that world and into that space. It leaves nothing to be desired. Next up, the Locust. I have been such a big fan of the Locust for a while. I've always said that they were one of the most important bands of the 90s and the 2000s. I cannot say enough good things about them. They are one of the most crazy, over-the-top, frantic, manic, just electric electric energy, power violence, and grindcore bands to ever exist, the amount of influence they had on different bands that incorporate noise and distortion and extreme forms of punk and power violence of the 2000s and 2010s, you're still seeing the influence of. And I know they kind of reunited for a bit. I don't know if they're still around, but oh my lord, the Locust is phenomenal, and you kind of go hand in hand with, once again, aesthetically, they're instantly recognizable, and that's very important for grindcore and power violence because they are in many ways pretty much the only band to do that, because you can look at other projects from death metal or even black metal or metalcore and see these bands that have a very unique style aesthetically. You don't really see that in grindcore and power violence. They usually take a pretty rigid, one-dimensional approach to the way that they look and the way that they perform. It has its specific culture to it, and it has its specific vibe to it that is instantly recognizable, but the bands themselves are not usually that individualized quite like the Locust were. Next up, Zeal Ardor. This is a band that is 100% just because of the sound themselves, incorporating black spiritual hymns and just hymns as a whole, religious hymns, into a black metal style. Now, I've always said black metal is the most tampered with genre, and I think it's wonderful. I love different offshoots of black metal, and I think that it's cool to see different bands incorporate different influences into black metal, but Zeal Ardor, I think, stick out like a sore thumb, and I remember when they burst on the scene, everyone was in awe, and you didn't usually see a lot of purists talk shit about them in the same way that they maybe would about a band like Death Heaven or a band like Liturgy or a band like Alcest. It's cool to see a project that sort of towed the line between different influences without really getting elitists and purebloods on their back. And I think that's a testament to not only the subject matter being very dark and grim, but also being very high quality enough to where you can know it's coming from an incredibly genuine place. And that's exactly where Zeal Ardor lie, in my opinion. And speaking of Liturgy, I'm going to put Liturgy here. The reason why I think Liturgy deserves to be here is the trailblazing of how they approached black metal, as well as Ravenna's worldview. The way that she sort of world built around Liturgy is something that you don't oftentimes see in black metal. Most of the time, black metal is a very static experience. You don't see that many concept albums, and when you do see concept albums, they're usually very on the nose and fictitious and that sort of thing. There is a lot of heart and guts and glory and a lot of Liturgy songwriting, and even though it is very heady and it is very cerebral in the way that she writes music, it's kind of clear to me that Liturgy embodies a certain energy that is just not going to be found from any other black metal project, and that itch is just not going to be able to be scratched by anything else. Watching one video from Ravenna would prove that, but even outside of that, the sort of revolutionary approach that they took to black metal songwriting, even though I think it's sometimes kind of overstated how much Liturgy was different than a lot of other bands, it was obvious that they were unique, and they did have a sort of transcendental sound that a lot of black metal bands just weren't capable of doing at the time, and you're seeing a lot of the influence from them. And I think it's very telling that Liturgy got so much shit from purebloods and from elitists, especially considering that it just seems like it depends on the project whether it gets hate or not. And I think that controversial and polarizing aspect to Ravenna's existence and also Liturgy's existence is just the most black metal thing ever. And I gotta shout out Decapitation. They're one of my favorite extreme metal bands of all time. I own so much of their shit. I praise them to no end. I think they are phenomenal musicians. Obviously, when they first started, they had a very vegan-centric style to their lyricism and to their aestheticism, but they never really gave that up. Throughout the 2000s and 2010s, their whole vibe and their whole aesthetic was putting humans in the space of animals. It was promoting veganism. It was very misanthropic and hateful, which misanthropic and hateful is something that it just comes with the territory of that sound, but it was the way Decapitation diverged from those expectations and subverted them by going more in a direction of putting humans in the space that we put animals, and then later bridging the gap to sort of this cataclysmic finish and this apocalyptic dystopian vibe with albums like Monolith of Inhumanity and then the Anthropocene Extinction. And then when you got an album like Death Atlas, it literally was the end of the world. And it's so cool to see sort of this lore building of Decapitation throughout the decades, where we have reached this point of cataclysmic downturn turn where the whole world is pretty much imploding on itself, and then the scraps that are left over being like the album Terracide. I think it is so cool. It's so unique. It's such a great message. Travis is an amazing dude. The band as a whole are just really positive and really awesome, and once again subvert the expectations of how grotesque and aggressive their style is, and I think that is awesome. And that's gonna wrap up my list. I could include some more, and I'd love to do a part 2 of this video if you guys would be interested in it, but you can let me know down below your opinions of my list as well as your picks for the best Gimmick bands. In your opinion, I can't wait to hear it. Agree or disagree, there is no wrong answer. Be sure to like this video if you enjoyed it, subscribe to join the review family today, and smash that notification bell to be notified of my future uploads. You know who it is, my name is Jay Morris, and I'm signing off saying farewell.